There's no image.
Assalamualaikum. Let's see if this is working. Okay.
I don't think it's working again.
On Instagram?
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
Instagram.
I see on Facebook. Oh, that's frustrating. Okay. Well.
Here, you want me to do it here?
Either's fine.
Okay.
I just have to figure out. We're going to turn video and mic off for just a minute, y'all. All right, there we go.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Assalamualaikum.
My name is Alia Salem, and this is my coworker, Sada Bawani. I'm the founder and the executive director for FACE, and we are so excited to be here. Sada, my coworker, is a licensed social worker, and she is our case manager who oversees all of the cases, the intakes and the outtakes, and making sure everything basically gets done. And we are excited to bring to you a live conversation with respect to the recent report that we released on Fateh Sefaragic, which was released on Tuesday. And we hope to have a good conversation that will help us to, dispel any pieces of information that might have been misunderstood, etc. And so we want you to be able to ask questions. If for any reason, you don't get your question answered, please don't hesitate to let us know. Send us an email. We'll be sharing some links after the fact. And today is dedicated to all of the people who are in the UK, who are in South Africa, who are in the Middle East and different parts of the world who may be joining, who are interested in this topic and want to learn. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Okay, so we wanted to be able to introduce ourselves to you, not only as individuals, but also as FACE. So we're going to take a few moments just to answer some questions for people who might not have been familiar with our organization prior to now. And we have 2 streams going, so you might see us look up and look down, just so we can make sure that we give, attention to both spots, and answering people's questions and checking out the chats, etc. We do have a moderator. Her name is Sarah Ahmed, and she is going to be helping us to answer those questions, get those questions to us, being able to share information, so that we can, moderate this pretty good and also keep this conversation respectful. Yesterday, we had several inappropriate comments, and things that we would rather not have on this conversation and platform. We do have survivors and victims who are in attendance, and who are going to be watching this information and watching what people say. So we ask you to be respectful in your conversations and to be kind and thoughtful. We want to start out with some community agreements to that note, and Sara is going to read those out for us.
All right. So some community agreements and ground rules for this conversation. Number 1, this is not a safe space. This is a brave space, and we'll be having hard conversations. Number 2, comments including victim blaming, demanding evidence, or for the victims to identify themselves, as well as profanity, will not be tolerated. As Alia just mentioned, there are survivors attending this Q&A, so we have a moderator who's working to block all the trolls and any disrespectful comments. So please don't be one of those people. Number 3, if you're a survivor or if you find yourself experiencing overwhelming emotions at any point, we do have 2 to 3 mental health counselors on standby right now. You're able to email them if you need some support or need someone to talk to. And that email is mentalhealth@facetogether.org. And our moderator is going to be posting that in the chat for everyone to see. Number 4, questions must be respectful with a genuine desire to understand. Listen with an open mind and assume positive intent. We're very transparent about who we are and our mission, which is why we're here. And number 5, we are not going to be discussing explicit details about the report. If you ask details about the report that are already in there, we're just going to direct you back to it. So we're assuming that if you're here, you've read through it already. And I believe that's it. Also, we'd love to know where you're attending from. So tell us in the comments where you're coming from.
Okay, so we're going to introduce ourselves a little bit more than what we did at the beginning. As I said before, my name's Alia Salem, and I'm the founder and executive director for FACE. I started FACE in 2017 as a response to the accountability gap that exists within the Muslim community with regards to our leadership. And the idea is to help address allegations of abuse in an academic, methodical fashion. We have a multidisciplinary approach that consists of several different fields. Those fields include law, mental health, organizational development, grassroots organizing, ethics and compliance,
Islamic theology.
Islamicism. Thank you, Sara. It's hard to remember off the cuff sometimes. And we combine those disciplines to form our process to be able to look at allegations from a, Lamise is here, to be able to look at those allegations from a very precise standpoint and making sure we understand all the different elements. And so I'll talk a little bit about what FACE is and what we do. So when we investigate the allegations of abuse, we do so in an effort to, if we can, substantiate those findings and be able to warn the community about people who have abused their positions of power and authority so that they don't continue on from masjid to masjid, being able to continue their patterns of abuse. Because one of the things we're seeing a lot within the Muslim community is that there is a real problem with speaking about these issues. And we'll get to talk about some of those difficulties and problems that we're seeing and why we may be seeing them. But making it so that these individuals who are mocking the professions of imams and scholars and community leaders, and making it so that people who are supposed to be able to trust these individuals are actually being harmed by them. And then that decreases the element of trust that people can have in those leaders. And so we want to be one of the many antidotes that could help to address this issue, minimize this issue. And of course, at the heart of what this is to center victims and survivors to be able to get the help and support that they need. And so that really is the essence of what FACE is here to do. We'll talk a little bit more in pieces about how our organization works as we go on, but I'd like to turn it over to Sada to introduce herself in more detail and what she does with the organization.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Sada Bawani. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here, and also a mental health counselor. I've been with FACE for about 2.5 years now. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I do a lot of the case management. I also do some of the investigations. I do some of the report writing. Mostly we just fill in each other's gaps and, are really good about being able to work together and just do what needs to be done. And we have a really amazing team, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. As to who we are as an organization, again, our name is FACE, which stands for Facing Abuse in Community Environments. And we are a registered 501c3 nonprofit. I think overseas that's known as an NGO, but started in 2017 to help investigate abuse by religious and community leaders with hopes to address leadership accountability and the gap that exists within the Muslim community. So we're multidisciplinary. And I think you covered all that part already. So, yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was our investigative process. We're just going to tease it though, because next week we will actually be releasing a lot of resources and materials for people to sink their teeth into in terms of helping them to install accountability methodology within their own communities. So we have a combined multidisciplinary process into a 7-part investigative process that relies on the subject matter experts from previously, where we discussed those different types of elements that come together to form our process. And it's really a groundbreaking, completely new process to be able to not only investigate, but substantiate and publicize this information. And so next week, one of the pieces of information that people will have access to is an FAQ that will talk about that process and what it looks like and how we go about doing this work and substantiating this work, etc. But we'll tease a few pieces for you here today so you can get to know us a little bit more. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is relating to a question. How do we substantiate? You may hear my cats in the background, so just FYI, I apologize. They're quite rowdy. How we substantiate information, and that is a very in-depth question. So I'm going to read to you some determined responses to help kind of elucidate our process. So statements and allegations require a minimum of 2 pieces of evidentiary support that support the allegation of abuse in definitive terms, which include but are not limited to. A piece of evidentiary support could be an admission of misconduct by the accused party. This is a very strong piece of evidentiary support. Independent corroboration by another victim, survivor, or source. Independent is defined as someone who does not have a direct affiliation with the other party who has also made a same claim or statement, and that information corroborates some or similar details of the violation that has occurred. An eyewitness that corroborates all or part of the investigation, a licensed professional who provides a formal statement that they received and documented a matching initial outcry or abuse disclosure. So a licensed professional, a lot of times people will speak to their therapist, their doctor, a lawyer, etc. Somebody who's a licensed professional and they're seeking assistance, they will go to them in an initial outcry moment and tell them exactly what happened. Sometimes that might be a family member as well. And so we take that information from that initial outcry, which is very close to the time frame when the abuse occurred, or before there was any sort of possibility for there to be an agenda, if that makes sense. So somebody was just disclosing for the sake of disclosing. And they weren't disclosing because there was an investigation or because there was litigation. They were disclosing because they needed to unburden themselves, and they told that information to a person. So a licensed professional is considered a whole substantiation in and of itself because of the formality that's involved. So if they disclose to somebody who's a licensed professional, we consider that in and of itself a form of substantiation by itself. If two or more individuals who are not necessarily professionals are licensed, who they have been provided formal statements to by the individual, they have disclosed this to information. So two or more individuals together who are not licensed, those constitute a piece of evidentiary support. Records of documented authoritative accountability process and or legal action in reference to the current allegation or other allegations similar in nature. So a lot of times with our cases, we will have things like police reports, and we will have things like court documents and restraining orders, things that people have taken concrete steps to report this, and we use that as a piece of evidentiary support to be able to corroborate what has happened. Verified soft or hard copies of evidentiary support that corroborate all or part of the allegation. And then let's see here. This includes, but is not limited to, phone records, identified recordings, verified text messages, verified screenshots, videos, photos, emails, employment records, disciplinary records, education records, and or travel documents. So those are really important pieces of information that we can use. We have to verify their accuracy, and there's great ways to be able to do that. So, we can feel confident that these are not doctored messages that we've been receiving, et cetera. And then finally, soft or hard copies of evidentiary support that were obtained directly by FACE, by authorized members of the investigative team. So we went to the sources and actually pulled the records or pulled the information so that we could be able to share that information as a part of a substantiation process. So Sada is going to talk a little bit about what of our some of our next steps after releasing this report, so you can kind of see what we're trying to do in addition to some of the information about FACE.
Yeah, so a lot of people have been asking, what's next? What do we do with this information? What can be done within our communities? So next week, we're doing like a FACE resource week where we're releasing a couple of toolkits and documents for your help to, bring back to your institutions. Number one is the FAQ, which will answer a lot of our most commonly asked questions in detail. And that's going to be on our website under the resources tab. We're also releasing a code of conduct, which we've been working on for 3 years. And it's just this giant document, but also is very, very methodical and detailed about how to implement protocols and processes within your community. And you can modify it as needed, of course, in consultation with FACE. So that's going to be available to the public for masajid and institutions to implement, because we also recognize that a great part of the problem within our communities is we just don't have the processes in place to deal with this when something like this happens. And lastly, we also have a community response toolkit that will also be releasing next week, which is meant to help people within our communities when a public outcry is made or when allegations of abuse are made public in general, whether through FACE or whether by a victim or a source, and what steps we recommend through a grassroots methodology in terms of what to do and what steps to take within your community. Besides that, what you can do with this report is just make sure you're talking about this in groups. This discussion and having conversations about this is really, really important. Take it back to your families, take it back to your institutions. If you're a leader or if you're a community representative of an institution, make sure you're masajid and institutions are having these conversations, because this is not the first case of abuse, and it is certainly not the last. And as more and more victims feel empowered to speak, this is going to become a very common to see these kinds of public outcries, and institutions need to be equipped and also need to understand how to approach situations like this. Another really big question in terms of next steps that we've been getting is about translating the report. Yes, we are working on trying to translate the report in several different languages. We ourselves don't have the bandwidth to do it, and we're also not equipped to do it. So if you speak French, Indonesian, Arabic, Uzbek, Malay, Bosnian, I think we have someone for German already. I think we may have someone for French already. But if you come from a country and have some kind of expertise in translating documents from English into the language that you speak, please reach out to us. We would love to have you volunteer to translate this, to take it back to your communities, to make sure that everyone is well aware of this information, and that no institution brings the subject of the report to their institution just because they weren't equipped with the knowledge because of a lack of translation. So yes, please, if that's something you're interested in helping us with, email admin@facetogether.org. And that's I think we pasted that email in earlier, but I just want to ask the moderator if she could paste it again. And the last couple of things you can do, in terms of volunteering, we don't take volunteers from outside the US and Canada, unfortunately, just because our scope is very limited to here. But there are some organizations that have been started as a result of this work in South Africa. So one of the ones in South Africa is Peace. So People Eradicating Abuse in Community Environments. I think they just launched today. I saw a cool post on their Facebook page. And then we're aware of another initiative in the UK called Adala. And I don't know much about them. We don't know much about them, but we'd love to connect with them. But it seems like they have a very similar mission. So if you also want to start this initiative in your country or where you're coming from, definitely reach out to us, and we'd love to help you.
And just as a little note, Lemisa Sukar, who is the founder of Peace, People Eradicating Abuse in Community Environments, she's actually watching today. And they just launched on their Instagram and social media platforms. So I encourage everybody to give them a look-see and go check out their information. If you're in South Africa, please check that out. Fabulous group of people who are doing this. And Lemisa and I have gotten to get to know each other over the past several weeks, and we've developed a really strong bond. She is also a FACE ambassador in South Africa, and is really bringing a strong force with her to that part of the world. And as Sara mentioned, it's not only Adala, which is an organization that's being formed. There's several individuals in the UK in the different parts of the UK as well. So not just England, but also in Ireland, etc. Sister Fatima is asking, can you not see my comments? Sister Fatima, we can see your comments. We're so excited that you can translate to Norwegian. Please do email us at admin@facetogether.org. We will be answering questions through our moderator. So we're not going to be paying attention directly to the chat. We just happen to see yours. But please do send an email to us. We would love to be able to engage with you on those translation services. That's super exciting. But for anybody who's asking questions, our moderator is making sure that we get the questions right here in our phone, so that, because some of them are duplicates, so she's just helping us to kind of combine everything. Did you talk about the other two things?
Yeah. So the last two things you can do, of course, pray. Prayers and du'as are really important. And we have a page on our website called Offer Prayer, where you can actually select prayers, kind of like in a shopping type of format, and you check out, and we can actually see those prayers. And it doesn't cost anything, but it's just a nice way to send us a message, and for us to also pass along to victims if you want to dedicate it to them. Just different du'as that you can make for them, and that we get to see. And then lastly, of course, donate, become a monthly donor. Just support this important work, because we can't do this work without the community. And yeah, those are some of the things you can do next.
So the next question is, why are we not covering this person's sin? Why are we not giving them 70 excuses, etc.? The concept in Islam around covering sin is called sitr. And sitr, literally, when you say covering of sin, it's referring to private sin and personal sin. There is a great article on the Karma website, which our moderator will also post in the link. And Karma is a group of attorneys who have looked into different pieces of information as it relates to Islam on topics that may be not understood as widely. And when we talk about covering of sin and referring it to personal sin only, there's a big difference between abuse and oppression and personal sin. So sins are being committed when, for example, if you do something in the privacy of your own home and somebody happens to find out about it, if you, you know, do something wrong that wrongs only your own soul and yourself, right, in private, but somebody happens to find out about it, okay, you cover that sin, right? But when somebody abuses another person, that's an entirely different category of sin. It's entirely different type of sin, where abuse and the oppression of another person and rights have been violated. That type of sin is something that we don't cover. And one of the passages from the Quran that refer to that is, oh, you've got it up there. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah does not like the public mention of evil except by one who has been wronged, and ever Allah is hearing and knowing. And that is Quran chapter 4, verse 148. That is a really important ayat that we use in our understanding of how we go about this work and how we speak out. There's also a very well-known verse in the Quran, "O you who believe, speak out firmly for justice, even if it is against yourself and your kin." And that's just a paraphrase of the verse. But these verses are so indicative of what our obligation is as Muslimin to speak out against injustices. And surely somebody who commits an injustice is committing a sin, but we're not here to police sins. We're here to address abuse, and private sin and public sin are two completely different things. So I would encourage you all to check out that that article. Our moderator did post it. It's Islamic Principle of Sitr and Cultural Bias. So I encourage you all to check that out as well. So Sarah's going to talk a little bit about false accusations. There were a lot of questions about how do we know this is not a false accusation, and what do you do about that?
Yeah, so there's an organization here in the US called the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. So the statistics I'm going to read is based on that and based on US stats. But that figure is going to be pretty applicable generally across the board. So there's this misconception that false accusations are very common, and that's actually completely false. The most commonly cited figure is that about 5% of rape allegations are found to be false. But what people also don't understand is that 95% of rapes and sexual assaults aren't even reported. And so if you take that number into account, then about 0.5% of rape and sexual assault allegations would be false. Someone also asked a question yesterday about, well, wouldn't that number be higher for someone who is, or wouldn't you argue that number would be higher for someone who's a public figure or a religious figure? And although I don't have the specific stats for that offhand, on hand, I mean, I would actually argue that no, it wouldn't be, because you also have to factor in that they have all the power in this situation and all the power within the community. And what reason would someone have to put themselves in such a precarious position for accusing someone of that kind of power and stature within the community? So that's just something to think about. And yeah.
So when we talk about false accusations, FACE does have processes that, even though this is such a, small likelihood that this would even happen, we do have processes in place to mitigate for false accusations. And one of those processes that we have in place is our substantiation process. Just, to make sure everything has to, the allegations have to come from firsthand knowledge, somebody with firsthand knowledge, not just a rumor, I heard so and so did so and such, but it has to come from somebody who has firsthand knowledge, they're a victim themselves, or they've dealt with it directly, etc., before we'll even consider looking into it as an investigation. But also the substantiation process. The substantiation process is such a, delicate and meticulous process to make sure that we've done everything we can. And so while we absolutely believe victims that come to us, and we, the minute they start talking, we stand in a position of believing them because we know how unlikely the possibility is that they are not telling us the truth. Even though we believe them, substantiating is another thing, right? Putting it out into the world as a formal FACE report is another thing. And so we can absolutely hold these two things in our hands, where we not only believe them, but also if we can substantiate it, we will put it out into the world. Even if we can't substantiate it, that doesn't mean that they're not telling us the truth. That just means that we don't have anything tangible to try and use to give substance and strength and body to the allegation. And so we still get them help and assistance. We still get them into professionals' hands who can address these issues, etc. And likewise, when it should be important for us to note that when some case goes to trial, just because they were not able to convict a person or they were not able to hold them liable for these, that doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. It just means the burden of proof was such that they weren't able to provide enough evidence, or they weren't able to establish or meet the burden of proof in that particular case. Because frankly speaking, it is so difficult especially when we're talking about sexual assault, it is so difficult for us to even be able to get that evidence, because most of the time this was done behind closed doors. And, a lot of times victims cannot bring themselves, for a lot of different reasons, to report immediately. And the DNA evidence goes and the tracking evidence goes. And so a lot of times they can't even get to having an ability to prove, right? Or to substantiate. So we have to understand that, these types of things are very difficult to substantiate. But we try to be creative in the best ways that we can to be able to hold this to count. So we also wanted to talk about confidentiality. People are asking us questions like, why don't the victims come forward? Why aren't we showing who they are? Because they, the abuser, or I should say the accused, has a right to face their accuser, right? And in a court system, yes, but we're not an adjudicatory body. We're not a court system. We're not legal jurists by any stretch of the imagination. We function very much like investigative journalists in a lot of ways, to where we, collect information and collect support for the allegations and try to share the truth of it with people. But when a person who's been accused, if they're going to get their rights taken away, so like what we're doing right now, we don't have even the possibility of penalizing beyond the bully pulpit, right? Beyond the media and beyond the public discourse. We are not taking away the accused's rights. We're not penalizing them in a way that stops them from doing what they're doing, etc. Now, the people may be able to do things that have a more drastic effect, but as far as FACE is concerned, we're putting information out there, and there are, things that might fall out from that as a result, but we're not an adjudicatory body that's taking rights away. We're not putting them in jail. We're not, imposing fines on them or things like that, right? So only in those situations is where an accused would need to face their accuser. But even then, even in court systems, and we're going to talk about confidentiality, even then, most courts, especially in the US, that we can speak to, provide mechanisms to protect the identity of victims, right? So there's lawsuits will use terms like Jane Doe or John Doe instead of the victim's name, et cetera. They'll have closed courtrooms, so you can't see who that person is. And they won't be, none of the judgments will have that victim's name in it. So that's saying one thing. As far as FACE is concerned, we will bend over backwards to be able to protect the identities of victims. It is so critical because one of the most important pieces about protecting a victim's identity is so that they will feel safe to come forward, so that they will feel safe to report this information. That goes with sources as well. If we have cooperative sources, we will protect their identities to the extent that we can. It doesn't fall in the same category as victim protection, but we do not mention names of sources or victims so that they can feel comfortable to come to us, to talk to us, to share what it is they know, because the potential for backlash, the potential for retaliation is so high that people are often, scared into silence. And we want to provide ways and mechanisms for people to come forward instead of to, slink away into the shadows. The number one reason that victims cite as to why they come forward is that they don't want this to happen to anybody else. And it's so critical that we nurture that and that we preserve that intention for them by providing them a safe place to come to and share this information. So one of the other questions was relating to evidentiary support and why we don't share those pieces. So Sara is going to talk a little bit about why we don't share things like screenshots and text messages, etc.
Yeah, so we don't share any salacious evidentiary support messages and screenshots and whatnot. Again, just going back to protecting the victim's identity and making sure that we uphold the confidentiality that we have promised them. And also, you had a really good point yesterday about like in a court of law, it would be different for evidentiary support versus now. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So when somebody goes to a court, for example, and a case goes to trial, etc., evidence is prepared and it's presented to either a judge, jury, or both. And it's for them to review and for them to be able to see. That evidentiary support is most often not shared with the public. It's not contained in the lawsuits. It's not contained in the judgment findings, etc. So you will never see that evidentiary support contained with any court documents or records. And one of the reasons law is a part of our discipline is because we do model some things after legal practices that are in line with our morals and principles and ethics around victim protection, etc. This type of information, especially pictures, especially recordings, statement recordings, things like that, they are very hard and traumatic to listen to. I can't tell you how difficult it is to do this work, to listen to victim statements over and over. It is a privilege. It is an honor, but it is so difficult to have to listen to and absorb and ingest all of this information. And we do not want to pass on that trauma to the community. Not to mention, we don't want to feed into the voyeuristic and sort of instant gratification that people have come to be accustomed to when these sorts of things arise. They want to see everything. They want to be investigators themselves. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to pass on this information. We also don't believe that it is compatible with Islamic ethics and morals to share some of this information, to share some of these conversations. They're quite graphic. And if you read the report, you'll see that what we shared
already was graphic.
Yeah. Graphic enough. And so we don't, put that information in the report so as not to traumatize people further, etc. And also when we share the information that we do share, we do so with all the proper content warnings and things like that. And so we're doing this at risk to ourselves. If we're coming in here with our names and our faces and our personalities and putting this information out into the world, right, we're doing so at risk to ourselves. And so we hope that people put a little bit of trust in the fact that we could be held responsible if we don't do this properly, that we could be held liable if we don't do this properly. And so that is why we're so careful about what we share with the world and what we don't. Now, the biggest question that everybody has wanted to know is with respect to why aren't the police involved? Why is there no litigation? Is he being prosecuted? If enough victims approve, can you approach the police? Will reports continue to some legal actions or repercussions? Have any victims filed civil claims? Why is he still free? Is he going to jail, etc.? So we combined all of these into one. I know that people want more information on this, but the simple statement is FACE is not at liberty to report. That is up to the victims, and it depends on the state that they live in within the US and as to whether or not charges can be filed, statute of limitations in those particular states. It is important to note that if there is a case and FACE is subpoenaed to testify, we already have testified in the first case that we released on, which was a very successful outcome for Jane Doe 1 in the Zia Sheikh trial. She won a $2.5 million judgment in a civil trial against Zia Sheikh. So in the US, we have a civil court and a criminal court, and she went and sued him in civil court for what he had done. And that just actually completed for the most part, and they won the appeal. Jane Doe won the appeal as well. So we did testify in that case. There is another case with one of our other reports where there is a criminal trial. We have been asked information. So while we don't necessarily cooperate with police or encourage people to go, if it does happen and victims to take that step, we will, cooperate to the requirements of the law with that. But with this particular case, it is the victim's right and privilege to be able to do with this information what they choose, right? And when there is it's a situation like this, especially sexual assault cases, I don't think people truly comprehend how difficult it is to report these issues, not only, but going through a trial is absolutely one of the hardest, most difficult things to do. And in the end, there is so much, there's no guarantees. Thank you. There's so much possibility that this person will never get convicted, that a lot of victims have a really hard time going to the police because they have to tell their story over and over and over and over. And it's such an invasive process. So we don't take that out of the victim's hands. We don't report this. And frankly, we don't have standing to report it, especially not without their cooperation. So it's important that we make sure that that responsibility, or that right, I should say, is firmly within the victim's hands. So we're going to go on to the next question. What do parents need to learn from these reports, and what to teach their children?
So again, this is, I believe, a US statistic, but one thing that we've learned in the research is that for children specifically, and about 30% of our cases that we have right now involve some type of child abuse, 93% of children actually know their abuser, and a vast majority of those people are, trusted figures in their community. So parents, what we recommend is that parents in community environments have to be part of a feedback circle that can establish their expectations for who's brought into the community, especially when they have access to the youth. They need to also be able to have early on conversations with their kids and establish a relationship of trust. And oftentimes a lot of parents don't know how to even have these conversations. And so there's a couple of resources we've compiled that our moderator will be posting in the chat. One is Noor Kids. There's also Halal Parenting, and then there's My Deen magazine. And all three of those resources do a really good job about introducing some of these difficult topics and just moderating that conversation between parents and children. And lastly, parents, but really all of us in general, we need to reevaluate how we look at big charismatic personalities, people with fame who we know nothing about, and we just stop expecting them to be role models for the children. The pedestals that we place these leaders on are part of the reason that we're struggling with this kind of abuse, and part of the reason why the fall of these figures hits us so hard. And that's a separate conversation for another day. But we really need to critically think about why we're engaging in that and recognize that that's feeding into this issue as well.
So, Fatima Mirani, I want to address, you said you genuinely thought this was going to be a legit Q&A. I'm not sure why you think it's not a legit Q&A. We are answering questions that were posed to us. We had hundreds, literally hundreds of questions that we were trying to get to, and we've got, I don't think you see everything that's happening. There are several different platforms running, and we also got a lot of questions on our social media pages in advance. So we're trying to work through these the best that we can. I'm not sure what seems to be the problem, but okay. That was strange. How is this report being distributed other than social media? Is it sent to various Islamic institutions? Yeah, so how will you be informing mosques around the world, especially in the UK, in South Africa? So we have emailed it to everyone who had an affiliation with this individual
that we know of.
we know of. And there are opportunities for sure to send it to other people. You can definitely send us an email at info@facetogether.org if there's people that you want us to send it to. We see your questions, Fatima. We need you to just hang on and wait your turn. We will definitely try to get to all the questions, and if we don't, then we will follow up with you afterwards. Let's see here. You can also send it to any circles that you want. If you're having difficulty sending it to them, or links aren't working, don't hesitate to reach out. We're so happy to be able to support you in trying to bring this back to your communities as well. So not everyone will believe this, unfortunately. So when will he give his side of the story? Why hasn't he responded? Gosh, that's a question for him. He's been fervently blocking everybody online and deleting comments furiously, and sharing stuff that is really strange in response to this. But I don't know when he's going to share his side of the story. We reached out to him multiple times and tried to get his comment, but we were blocked from doing that. He blocked us on social media accounts, etc. We tried to reach out to his manager, radio silence. We did connect with a person who knows his manager, and they reached out. And what he said, what the manager says was, we're not interested in commenting. We're not interested in commenting. We've moved on and we're in a good place. And so that was basically all the response we received. And early on in the investigation, somebody who identified himself as the subject's manager, and another person who identified himself as an attorney, although we're fairly confident he was not an attorney, tried to intimidate us and threaten lawsuits and things like that. So that was in the very beginning. Yeah. But that's really all that's happened. So that's a question for him. Sada, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. Some people want to know how do you convince people that things like this happen, as sometimes they refuse to believe it. And the hard truth is that not everybody will believe it. That's a fact. But what those of us who do believe and do understand the urgency have to focus on is changing the culture. And that's why FACE exists. And that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And that's why you all are so important as well, to make sure you take this back to people and, have these conversations with them.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and get to Fatima's question. She's really impatient and wants an answer to her question. So I saw the question was asking if FACE supports LGBTQ. So that's a really loaded question. I want to address it in a way that makes sense for what we're talking about. So we help anybody who comes to us, and we do not ask them what their background is, what their beliefs on certain things are. If they've been abused by religious and community leaders, we will help them. And if they identify as somebody who is from the LGBTQ, background or something like that, we will help them too. As far as what Islam says, we're not scholars, but Islam is clear on these topics. We're conservative Muslims, and we believe it's important to uphold the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's very clear on that topic. So I'm not sure why this is coming from. You shared very fervently your message and your requests. And so we want to address them, but we do want to get to the questions that have come first. I hope that answers your question. We don't have an agenda other than to help people who've been abused by religious and community leaders. And being able to help everybody is so critical to this work. We cannot discriminate against anybody, regardless of their background or regardless what their identities contain as a part of the very complex identities that all of us contain. And so we want to stress that FACE is absolutely a safe and open place for anybody, regardless of what they're going through, what their background is, or identities, etc. We are a safe, unjudgmental, unbiased organization that will help anybody and everybody, and recognize your right to humanity and dignity and safety for all people. As far as what Islam says, that is clear about engaging in relationships with the same gender. But that's not really what we're here to talk about today. So we're going to move on from that. I hope that answers your question, and I hope that was helpful. So if this ever happens to someone, what should they do? Sara?
It depends on where you live. But the most important thing that a victim should prioritize is taking care of themselves above anything. Again, a lot of times people who don't understand these issues, their first priority is to make sure people know about it or make sure that it's reported to the authorities. But again, as Alia has been saying over and over, that the trauma and the impact this has on victims cannot be understated. And it's important that they're well supported mentally, emotionally, and whatnot. So again, depending on where you live, there may be different resources. I would encourage you to look up those resources in your community. There are very many organizations dedicated to helping survivors of sexual violence. And when it comes specifically to clergy abuse, there's a lot of initiatives that are popping up. In the US, of course, we have FACE. We also work closely with the Herma Project, within Sheikh's Clothing. Remind me if I'm leaving anything out.
Family and Youth Institute.
Yeah, FY.
Peaceful Families Project. And now Peace in South Africa.
Yeah, which is exciting.
Woo! I can't wait to share y'all's links. I'm so excited. The YouTube link is not working.
Oh, that's weird.
It's showing posting.
Yeah.
I apologize, Sarah, for that. Hopefully it'll come back on, but it'll be available here afterwards if you want to catch the beginning of it. The next question we have is, any chance we can start with deleting his social media platforms as a first step? So that's not part of FACE's mandate. And frankly, we don't have the bandwidth to organize that. But we do encourage the community at large to take any steps that they think would make the community safer. And it's really part of FACE's hope and desire, like our big objective, that FACE can inspire, along with everybody else working in this area, cultural change so that the community will take the reins and the community will be able to hold these individuals accountable. We're here to give you the information so that you can go out and do that, right? We're here to give you vetted information so that you can take that, feel good about taking steps. We're just a little scrappy team in the US that's trying to hang on for dear life and stay open and try to do this work full time. So we need everybody in the community to take a piece of this work and go for it. So if you think of creative ways to, whether it's through social media or other stuff, by all means, you need to take whatever steps to use the information we've provided and to hold this individual accountable. Start grassroots movements and things like that. Like, the sky's the limit. What words of reassurance can you give to us Muslim sisters in times of despair like these? So I just want to say, us too, we're right there with you. We have had our moments of despair. We have had our moments of struggle and of heartache in doing this work. What I can say to you is hang on.
And having each other helps.
Have people who you can lean on, but most of all, hang on to that rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that's so easy to say, but I can speak for myself and Sada can speak for herself. We have absolutely walked through really, really difficult, traumatizing moments that have shaken us to our very core. And we all know that Iman is something that is an ebb and flow, right? That we get strong in our Iman and low in our Iman. And that happens to everybody. And I would say that it is critical that you do not despair. Why? Because for all the abusers that exist in the world, there are people 10 times the amount of the abusers that exist. There are great people, wonderful people, people who are doing good deeds and good work that far outweighs. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Allah's mercy outweighs his wrath. And just hang on. If you have an ounce of tawakkul and of faith, and just hang on to whatever little smidge you've got, and Allah is going to see you through it. Just keep turning back to him. Keep seeking his pleasure. Just hang on to any little piece you have. We're going to share some victim statements at the end of this, and I hope that that will help you, because surely if anybody has been having feelings of despair. It is these women. And I think if you stay on till the very end, I think that you will get some real inspiration from them. And they've shared some really beautiful victim impact statements with us that we will share with you today. The next question is, will institutions who have hosted him be speaking out, and prominent mashayikh he has dealt with? Do you want to take this one?
No.
Oh. Well, why are imams and scholars that know him not speaking up? Community faith leaders, don't they need to take a different approach, support victims, not the abuser? So I just got into not an argument. I just shared some thoughts because I feel this question so much. There is so much trepidation around this topic. I think our community is just starting to wake up to it. These things have been happening since time immemorial, but our community is just now starting to realize that we can say something. And, scholars and imams and mashayikh, they're human beings just like the rest of us. And while, don't get me wrong, I do have the desire for more robust vocality from our community leaders. I also want to have some rahmah for them as well, because this is such a contentious topic for people to discuss. And I think people are just finding ways that they can do it. And not to mention, there's so much backlash that comes from speaking out against these things. And I do want our leaders collectively, because the more leaders that come out and speak fervently on these issues and speak up for victims, etc., the more will come out, right? So it's like a domino effect, exactly, where they'll be able to. So it just takes a few people. We have seen, one or two people who've made some statements, one who has been very specific on social media. And that was a real boon to our spirits. But we want to see more. So I think there's a lot of fear of retaliation from people who think that they have an agenda, or that they are doing things wrong, or have some sort of vengeance or things like that. I've seen the variety of reasons. So they get a lot of flack too from saying stuff. So I think we should have rahmah for everybody, but definitely push your leaders. I mean, have rahmah for them and good thoughts and compassion towards them. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't push them to speak out on these issues. You absolutely should. Yeah. They should be speaking it from the mimbar. They should be having khatiras about it. They should be doing everything within their power to speak, because I guarantee you, once this community stands with one voice, inshallah rabbil alameen, this type of stuff will be eradicated, or at least minimized, inshallah.
Yeah. And I also just want to add that a lot of the people who actually send reports to us are imams and community leaders and shuyukh. So they want to see, us hold their colleagues accountable who are ruining it for them. So we can't, we need to do this work with them, and we want them to join us in this. So this is not meant to be an us versus them type of endeavor.
Absolutely. Okay, so how did you conduct the investigation? I'm going to turn that over to our case manager, Sada.
Do you want to give the short answer or the long answer?
The short answer.
So we have a little flow chart on our website. I think it's if you go to our tab, the website's facetogether.org. And if you go to report abuse and go past the moratorium, there's a little flow chart that can kind of break that down. But basically, we don't go after cases on our own. Someone has to submit a formal report to us. So we don't chase people down. We're not trying to, I don't remember the word you used, but chase the fire, go fire chasing. We really want
ambulance
chasing. That's what it was. We wait for someone to submit a report to us, and we have plenty. We do an initial intake with them. We ask very, very specific questions. We gather what kind of evidentiary support they can give us to substantiate the claims. We also assess whether the person's a primary source or victim. And then we have a way of also, like we mentioned earlier, just mitigating for false claims. And, a lot of the intake will weed that out. we'll get to that later. And so after we take on the case, we give them an informed consent to proceed, which gives us permission to take their allegation and conduct an investigation on it. And these take anywhere from a few months to sometimes years. Again, just because we're very short-staffed and because we're very, very meticulous and detailed about how we go through this. So that includes interviews, doing background checks, obtaining evidentiary support either from victims and sources or from entities like background checks or criminal reports, for example. And then we compile the findings into the report. We send it to our board. We send it to our subject matter experts. We review it with the victims, and then we publish. So that's the short version.
Are there testimonies from former partners or community members? So there are statements that were made by the former affiliations of the subject. So Human Appeal and Muslim Aid USA. Muslim Aid USA released one last year. They had an affiliation with him. And immediately after the public outcry in the US, Muslim Aid released a very strong statement. We included it in the report. So they came out, very strong on this issue and were quite clear on their position. In addition, after there was a big public outcry in the UK, Human Appeal came out and severed their ties and made a public statement about it. So those were really, heartwarming statements, and we encourage everybody to go read them. They're linked in the report on the first page. But as far as other statements, there have been individual statements for sure. There have been people who have made personal statements, partners who have shared faces stuff like the Hurma Project and other organizations. So we are seeing some institutional support for this. So alhamdulillah. How do we deal with other Muslim women this is a good one. Yeah. How do we deal with other Muslim women who victim blame, use hijab and mahram rules to weaponize against and shame the Muslim community who get abused? I hear the argument a lot around women seduced or asked for it for being alone with the abuser. So
your cat's getting a lot of love, by the way.
Oh, how do we deal with it? I think it's up to all of us to be able to push back because everybody suffers from the same problems, right? Everybody suffers from the same sort of shortcomings and misguided philosophies around how we look at these issues. It's really critical that we understand that no matter how a person shows up, when we talk, especially when we talk about consent, even if they were alone with a person, it doesn't matter. They should be safe in another person's hands. Just because they were alone with a person doesn't mean that anybody has the right to abuse them. I tell people all the time, especially religious and community leaders, they have an even bigger obligation to, to meet the levels of trust that people have placed in them. And so when somebody who is alone or maybe, looking for an opportunity to speak to somebody or get to know somebody, etc., that doesn't give anybody the right to take advantage of them sexually or otherwise. A person's body should be protected and it should be sanctified. The Hurma Project, the word Hurma, I love that Dr. Madsen named it this because the word Hurma means the sacred inviolability of a person, right? A person's Hurma. And that is absolutely how we should be looking at this. Everybody, man, woman, and child, even kitty cats, they have the right to be treated with dignity and respect and cared for and not abused, right? No matter where they are or what they do. So we have to push back on women the same as we push back on anybody who is victim blaming, etc. And we're all,
Sorry.
oh, yeah, that's a good question. We're all, vulnerable to being people who don't show up in the right ways. And this is a whole community problem. This, while women are overwhelmingly the victims of abuse, this is a whole community problem. We all have to address this. We have a number of male victims. We have a number of victims who are young boys. This affects, all of us. There were people in this report who were men who were either victimized or abused or manipulated in some way by this individual. What compelled the community leaders in Kuwait to reach out to a small organization 12,000 kilometers away about these serious allegations? So that's a really good question. We are very small, alhamdulillah, but we do have a lot of connects and a lot of, relationships with people all over the world. And through some of those relationships, somebody reached out, and somebody who is connected to people in Kuwait, and they reached out to us and asked us for this information, and we certainly obliged. We wanted to give them information as early on as possible about what it is that we knew from the standpoint of the information that we had already collected early on. So, the world is becoming a much smaller place with social media. So that's all that I can say. And alhamdulillah, our reputations to a certain extent have helped facilitate that. Some of our relationships and whatnot. I mean, the way we show up and do this work, I'm sure contributed to some of that, alhamdulillah. But above all, this is Allah's dominion. And, if he wants a little tiny scrappy organization like ours to be, connected to people on the moon, he could do that. So we just did what we were called to do in responding.
We'll just do 2 more questions.
Yeah. How can we support your work? So we said at the beginning how we can support, how you can support our work, offer prayers. You can either do that privately by yourself, or you can go to facetogether.org/prayer and send them to us. It lets you put them in a little shopping cart. You don't have to pay for prayers. Okay. It's just a cute little tool to have a mindful awareness around sending us a prayer, and so that we can share it with us or with victims, etc. So that's a wonderful way. You can also donate to our work, facetogether.org/donate. We are trying very hard to raise enough money to hire at least 2 more people, especially an investigator, to help us to do this work and address the deluge of cases that we have. My goodness,
we're 40.
Yeah, we have 40 cases now after we closed this one, and we're absolutely drowning in trying to do this type of stuff. So we really want to hire more people. How can I respond to individuals attacking FACE's credibility and not accepting the report as valid? I hope that we shared some information with you, some talking points today that might help. Just being kind and polite and consistent with, what is important about these things. A lot of the footnotes, I want to direct you to a lot of the footnotes in the report are for that purpose. They're to help you understand the dynamics that are at play here and how you can talk about these issues. But I'm not going to lie, there's quite a bit of work that you have to do to inform your own self first. So that's what I would say. I would say inform yourself on what it is that is happening, how we dealt with it, what are some of the knowledge pieces that we share to try and inform you better, and then gently and compassionately respond back to them. But you don't have to tolerate any sort of abusive conduct or disrespectful behavior demanding your time and attention.
Let's do this one.
Okay. Can you share success stories of your organization? Absolutely. So this will be the last question, and then we are going to read the victim statements that I'm sure you are all eager to hear as well. So some great success stories. So our very first case is probably our biggest success story. That case was published in 2018, and the primary victim, Jane Doe 1, who was abused by this individual. She was groomed from a very young age by her religious leader. And then when she became of age, he manipulated her and enticed her to a hotel room. And she didn't even know what was happening. And then he forced himself upon her. She was able to sue him in civil court, and she won a $2.5 million judgment, and they just won the appeal for that. We testified in that civil trial. It was one of the honors of my life to be able to do that and stand beside her and support her in all the ways that I could. And her attorneys were amazing. Farhana Qureshi and her team were amazing. Asia and Susan as well. Susan was a phenomenal attorney who really put a lot of strength and power behind it. So that's our biggest success story. But we have a lot that we share, on our website and on our social media pages. So we encourage you to stay tuned. But most of our successes come in the form of, people and their testimonies and things that they say about us, which is what I'd like to segue into now and discuss some of the statements that victims have shared with us, their victim impact statements. We could talk about this forever, y'all. We would love to try and answer your questions after the fact. There's so many of them. We will do our very best. And stay tuned next week. We will be releasing our FAQs. We will be releasing the community response toolkit, and we will be releasing our long-awaited code of conduct for communities to be able to utilize and put into practice for their own communities. So please stay tuned. If you haven't joined our social media accounts yet, it's at Facing Abuse. So the @ symbol Facing Abuse is for Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And then YouTube, you'll have to just search it because there's no short URL. We have to have so many subscribers before we get one of those. But it's Facing Abuse in Community Environments. You can definitely find it on YouTube. Okay.
So one of the questions we got that we wanted to elaborate on, which is how are the survivors doing? How can we support them? Are they doing better? So we reached out to them and asked if they wanted to share anything with all of you. And a couple of them did submit something. So we did want to finish out by reading them. And also just remember that these live videos will be saved to our channel. So if you missed some of the questions at the beginning, you can go back and rewatch. So the first statement, I really hope his wife is safe and protected. The earlier she notices the signs of abuse and narcissism, the easier it will be for her to get out and the less trauma she will have to endure. Number 2, first, I want to thank Face for giving a platform for us to finally speak out. Even though it's anonymously, it feels like a big weight has been lifted off my chest and that justice is finally being served and he's being exposed. I finally feel heard. I think the only thing that I'd like to bring a reminder to is the understanding of the underlying guilt that comes along with being a survivor, the internal shame and disgust, sometimes making you feel like you'll never be clean. We need to be reminded to always be kind and keep the judgment away. I guarantee we are all beating ourselves up with shame more than anyone else could shame us. Therefore, keep the horrible comments to yourself. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, and all that could have been done different is something we have already gone through, more than any advice anyone could give us. Whoops, I lost my place. That anyone could give us.
Yeah, especially
the men out there. Hindsight is always 20/20. Take a moment to understand spiritual abuse. You don't go to the Pope expecting to come out a sexual assault survivor. Remember that. Remember that same glorification you hold them to was probably what we did too. Like I said before, my city's non-Islamic culture was so toxic, and she says it in quotes, the culture was so toxic and it was a perfect breeding ground for him to keep up with his abuse. The glorification of people in these positions needs to be checked and removed. They're humans capable of sin. We all are. So to hold them on such high pedestals where we're all shunned and attacked for speaking out is just telling and ridiculous. People are one way in public, but another way behind closed doors. That clout only empowers them to be even more reckless behind closed doors because there will always be an army to blindly come to their rescue. And then,
and the last one, I haven't been able to pray since that day. Because how could he be a man of God and do this to me? How can he be chosen by God and do what he did? How could he be living his best life after he ruined mine? His name till this day gives me a panic attack. I can't say it out loud. It would sicken me to see the words honorary or esteemed before it. I would block every Instagram account I came across with him featured on it. The more famous he got, the further my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala got. I felt like I couldn't get away from him. His words would echo in my head constantly. You're not worth my time or attention. I let those words define me for too long. I got the text from a friend. Have you heard? With a link to a Twitter thread. I fell down on my knees crying. I thought I was the only one. And then I blamed myself. Had I told someone, anyone, about what he did to me, maybe he wouldn't have done it to others. But I'm done blaming myself. After my interview with Alia and Sarah, I fell down in sujood. I prayed. I felt like something heavy was lifted off of me. I'm thankful for them being an outlet for a grief I had held on to for so long, and I'm ready to take my power back. Fateh Sefaragic will not define me anymore. Jazakumullahu khairan to everybody who attended. Thank you so much. If we haven't answered your questions, please be patient with us. Send us an email to info@facetogether.org. We posted the link in the social media accounts. We're so grateful for all of your support, for attending this live. We hope you share this information with others. We hope you share the report with everybody. Remember, if you have access or you yourself are a translator, we are looking to translate this into other languages. Please speak up about this in your community, everybody. There's 90 people on Instagram and 30 people collectively between YouTube and Facebook on here. And that person has 1.5 million followers. And he's not the only one who has these deluge of supporters. We have to come together, and we are a small but mighty group of people around the world who can do something to address these issues. And so we encourage everybody to get involved, to do what they can, and to take a moment to pray with everybody on doing this issue. And I'm happy to take any questions. We're happy to take any questions over email, and we'll be happy to answer anything else, inshallah rabbil alameen. Sarah Noor, I really do hope you listen to the rest of the live. I think you really need to understand what is happening in terms of legalities. I know you're really frustrated, and if you want to reach out to us, please don't hesitate. We'll be happy to talk to you and help you work through a lot of these emotions and concerns that you're experiencing from this live, and that goes for anybody on here. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. Please pray for us. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.